On October 15, 1981, a 4-year-old girl named Sasha Stone went to school and came home to a world that no longer had her mother in it. Sonia Herok-Stone had been sexually assaulted and strangled inside their home while Sasha sat in kindergarten. The man who did it was caught within 24 hours, living right across the street, with the scratch from her mother's fingernails still fresh on his face. He went to trial, and he walked out of that courtroom a free man. For the next 40 years, Sasha watched him live his life in the same county where he destroyed hers. What she didn't know was that her mother had already guaranteed his conviction. She had scratched him, and the DNA under that broken nail had been waiting in storage the entire time. This is the case of Sonia Herok-Stone. But before we continue, please subscribe to this channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Hi, Sonia was Canadian. She grew up in Quebec, the kind of young woman who fills a room without trying, sharp, warm, the sort of person people gravitate toward without quite knowing why. She came to California in her early 20s, the way a lot of people did in that era, chasing something she could feel but not yet name. She found work. She found community. She found love, briefly. And when that love turned into something quieter and more complicated, she found the strength to start over. By the time she settled in Carmel by the sea with her young daughter, Sasha, she had built a life that genuinely suited her. Her work at Levi Strauss had become a source of real pride. She was good at it, recognized for it, moving forward in ways that mattered to her. She had friends who loved her. She had a daughter she adored. And she had Carmel itself, which is the kind of town that makes you feel, for a while at least, like the world cannot touch you. But something had been disturbing that peace in the weeks before she died. Phone calls that went silent when she answered. The unshakable sense of being watched. One night, a close friend was visiting when they both heard heavy footsteps outside in the darkness. Someone in the bushes, close enough to make them afraid. The police came. They found nothing. They left. And life resumed, the way it does when there is nothing concrete to hold on to, nothing official to point to, just a feeling. 1 month later, that feeling had a name. Sonia's friend Caroline McBride arrived at the house around midday on October 15th for what should have been an ordinary visit. The car was in the driveway. Nobody answered the door. Caroline pushed it open, stepped inside, and found her friend on the floor. This house had not been broken into. Whatever happened inside those walls had unfolded slowly, deliberately, without the kind of chaos that suggests panic or accident. Sonia had been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled with her own pantyhose. She had fought. The evidence of that was written on her body. On her left ring finger, a nail had broken in the struggle, and underneath it, caught in the last act of resistance she was capable of, was blood, not hers. Caroline ran. She drove through the streets, screaming until she found someone to call for help. And by the time detectives arrived, the crime scene had already begun to tell its story to anyone trained to listen. The lead detective on the case was a man named Linz Dorman. He was methodical, experienced, and from the moment he walked into that house, he understood exactly what kind of violence had taken place there. He also understood that whoever did this had not been a stranger passing through. The lack of forced entry, the nature of the attack, the time it took. This was someone who knew where he was going and felt confident enough to stay. The following morning, Dorman began canvassing the neighborhood. He knocked on doors. He asked questions. And when he crossed the street to the house directly opposite Sonia's, he found a man in the front yard who stopped him cold. The man was large, powerfully built in the way that draws the eye, and he was wearing a face mask. When Dorman asked him to remove it, he saw a scratch running the length of the man's right cheek, raw, deep, and fresh. His name was Michael Scott Glazebrook. He was 25 years old and had recently moved into the area. He explained the scratch by saying he had cut himself on plexiglass in his garage. Dorman checked the garage. There was no blood on the plexiglass, no blood on the work surface. Nothing. And when investigators later spoke to Glazebrook's parents, they heard an entirely different explanation. Their son had told them he got the scratch in a fight at college. One man, two stories. A dead woman across the street who had scratched her killer hard enough to draw blood. Investigators brought Glazebrook in using outstanding traffic warrants as the basis for the arrest, a decision that would later cost them dearly. At the station, he continued to shift his account, eventually claiming that he had been inside Sonia's house on the morning she died, but insisting the visit was innocent, that the two of them had been involved. He failed a polygraph. The blood typed from beneath Sonia's fingernail matched his type. A woman he had been seeing came forward and told investigators he had admitted to being in the house that morning. It was not an airtight case, but it was a case. And in July 1982, Glazebrook was formally charged with first-degree murder. What happened next was a slow unraveling that everyone involved would spend the rest of their lives trying to make sense of. The judge ruled before the trial even began that everything Glazebrook had said during his interrogation was inadmissible. The traffic warrant arrest had been used as a pretext to question him about a murder, and the law did not allow for that. Every contradiction, every damaging admission, every shift in his story, gone. Then came the mugshot. When he had been booked, a photograph had been taken, objective, time-stamped proof of the scratch on his face. But when prosecutors went to retrieve it, they were told the camera had malfunctioned. The photograph did not exist. And then the witness, the woman who had come forward to say Glazebrook placed himself at the scene, took the stand and recanted everything. She had been angry at him, she said. She had told police what she thought they wanted to hear. The defense presented a man without a scratch, without a confession, without anyone willing to stand behind what they had previously said. His parents testified he had been fine that day. The jury deliberated. They could not agree. 9 believed there was not enough to convict. 3 believed there was. The judge declared a mistrial. The charges were dropped, and Michael Scott Glazebrook walked out of the courthouse a free man. He told reporters he had always known he was innocent. Then he went home, and he stayed. For the next 4 decades, Glazebrook remained in Monterey County. He drove a school bus for the local school district, waking early every morning, running his route, opening the door at each stop while parents lifted their children onto the steps and trusted him to deliver them safely. He coached youth baseball. He became a grandfather. He was, to all outward appearances, simply a man who had been wrongly accused a long time ago and had quietly gotten on with his life. And Sasha Stone grew up knowing that the man who killed her mother was out there, nearby, untouchable. She had been 4 years old on the morning. Her world changed. She had no memory of what her mother looked like alive, only photographs and the stories other people carried for her. She grew up with nightmares, vivid, recurring, waking her screaming in the dark. She grew up with grief that had nowhere to go because the justice system had closed the door and left her standing outside it. She grew up angry, and she did something useful with that anger. She pushed. She asked questions. She walked into Lynn Dorman's office as a teenager and demanded to know why nobody was doing anything. Dorman, long retired, was asking himself the same question. He never stopped calling the sheriff's office to check on the case. He never filed it away the way the system had. The evidence was still there. Everything collected from the scene in 1981. The samples from Sonia's body, from beneath her fingernail, had been preserved in Monterey County storage. In 1983, none of it could be used to identify a specific individual. The science simply did not exist yet. But science does not stand still, and by 2020, it had arrived somewhere that 1983 could not have imagined. Late that year, the Monterey County District Attorney's offices launched a cold case task force and assigned Detective Aris Wilson to take a fresh look at the Herok-Stone file. Wilson reviewed the evidence list. He contacted Dorman, and he asked the question that changed everything: whether those stored samples could now be processed using modern DNA technology. They could. The evidence went to the California Department of Justice Laboratory. A warrant was obtained to collect a DNA sample from Glazebrook, who remained exactly where he had always been. Same county, same community, 65 years old, still driving the bus. In August 2021, the lab returned its findings. The DNA retrieved from beneath Sonia's broken fingernail matched Michael Scott Glazebrook. The DNA recovered from her body matched Michael Scott Glazebrook, the blood she had drawn from her killer in the last seconds of her life. The evidence she had left behind when she had nothing else left to give had held his identity for 42 years and survived everything the case had thrown at it. On the evening of August 14, 2021, detectives watched Glazebrook pull out of his driveway in Seaside. They pulled him over. He did not resist. He was handcuffed, arrested, and booked on a murder warrant, his bail set at $1 million. Every detective present that night was wearing Levi's jeans. A deliberate choice, noted in the official arrest announcement, in honor of the woman who had spent her working life at the company, whose name was stitched into the back pocket of every pair. It was a small thing. It was also the only tribute available to them in that moment, and they took it. When Sasha was told her mother's killer had been arrested, she was overcome. The second trial opened in January 2023. The defense had no answer for the DNA and so attacked the process. 40 years of storage, chain of custody questions, the passage of time. They pointed to the man at the defense table and described everything he had been in the decades since 1983. A driver, a coach, a father, a grandfather, a man without a single arrest on his record. The jury was unmoved. Sasha Stone testified. She did not dramatize what she had lived through. She simply described it. A childhood spent in the shadow of an unanswered question. A life measured against the presence that was always missing from it. 42 years of carrying something that should never have been hers to carry alone. There is no argument that answers that testimony. There is only the truth of it. On February 7, 2023, the jury found Michael Scott Glazebrook guilty of first-degree murder, with findings of rape and use of a deadly weapon. On June 7, 2023, Judge Pamela Butler sentenced him to life in prison without any possibility of parole. He was 67 years old. He would die inside. That April, Sasha Stone stood at a podium in Salinas, California, and spoke at a ceremony honoring victims of violent crime. She spoke about resilience and about the long, unglamorous work of surviving grief. And she spoke about her mother, the woman from Quebec who came to California with her whole life ahead of her, who loved fiercely, who worked hard, who raised a daughter who never gave up on her. She closed the way only she could. She was my mother. And now at last, the record reflects exactly who took her.